Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Stage 2, and a warm welcome back to Stage 2 for the people watching online. Nice to have your company. We're going to be talking now about how insurance meets sustainability, and probably not just insurance, because Aviva does so much more than insurance, and driving change, and how a company like yours, Leah, can support the transition. So, Leah Ramoutar, thank you for joining us. You're Director of Environmental Sustainability at Aviva. Best you talk a bit more about yourself and what you do and how you do it at Aviva, just to set the scene for people.
Of course. Thank you, Tim, and welcome everyone. So Leah Ramoutar, Director of Environmental Sustainability. I lead our group Environmental Centre of Excellence, which is essentially a unit that sits within group and group sustainability that focuses on sort of four key things. So our net zero strategy and how we're going to deliver on our ambitions, our nature strategy and delivery, do a huge amount of work around policy and advocacy, because as a financial institution, there's only so much within our control. So working very closely with policymakers on that area, and also focusing quite a lot recently on climate risk management. So very broad remit, really interesting stuff. Started my career, I'm originally from the Caribbean, started my career in sustainable finance, working on eco-development projects back in the Caribbean and South America, but done lots of work within financial services over the last 20 years.
Wow, I mean, you just picking up on what you said there, that being a financial company, there's only so much you can do. But of course, Aviva's fingers are in so many pies by virtue of the fact that you're an insurer, you're a pension provider, wealth management, sovereign investments, all sorts. So how does a company such as yours help to lead the drive to worldwide carbon reduction?
It's a really good question. I think I often get people saying, well, what does an insurance company care about climate change? Yeah. But actually, the answer is very simple. This really kind of affects our bottom line. You have increased sort of severe weather events, whether they're floods or wildfires, they really impact our claims, and they in fact impact our bottom line. They ultimately impact our business model and the sort of the long-term viability of our business model. So that's a very simple answer. I think as an insurer and also as an investor, I think we have a really important role. If I think about the insurance aspect of our work, I sort of see our role at Aviva as enabling that kind of low carbon transition and low carbon growth, whether it's underwriting renewable energy or supporting the transition to a kind of cleaner transport network through insuring electric vehicles, for example. There's a huge amount that we can do there. From an investment perspective, so we have about 400 billion of assets under management. So that gives us a huge amount of influence. And that's all about the kind of the redeployment of the capital and the reallocation of capital to the decarbonisation efforts. So again, a huge amount that we can do. I think it's also worth mentioning, and I think I always try to say this in any forum that I am, we're obviously a financial institution, lots of corporates in the room. There's a lot that we can do, what I call, to kind of get our house in order. Mm-hmm. So our kind of own operational footprint, our scope 1 and 2, we've got really strict targets around getting that to net zero, whether that means looking at 100% renewable electricity, phasing out gas in our buildings, retrofitting, looking at on-site generation. You know, there's a huge amount that we can do that's very much within our control as an organization.
But because you are so big and you have so many partners, suppliers, millions of customers, the partnership bit must be particularly huge for you. And on an earlier panel today, we were discussing the trickiness and the tricks of managing that, the whole partnership bit. How do you manage that?
It's good fun. So I think that's probably the first thing I would say. So we, just for a bit of background, so one of the things that we have done and committed to as an organization is allocating 87 million pounds of funding to carbon removal, nature-based carbon removals and climate resilience projects. So we work quite closely with the Wildlife Trust, Woodland Trust, WWF was one of our previous partners, on projects across UK, Ireland and Canada. Those are kind of our core markets. And one of the reasons why we chose that, because people said, well, why don't you just donate the money to the environmental agency? Actually, there's a real power, I think, in collaboration. So working very closely with partners on the ground who've got that local level experience and exposure, able us to kind of reach different parts of the community and a different customer base, but also being quite intentional and being involved in some of these projects, helping to shape them, seeing them from kind of start to completion, using it as an opportunity if we want to get a couple of our colleagues out to volunteer to climb, some of the summits in Yorkshire, for example. There may be a project that we've got there. So there's a lot of benefits to us sort of working in partnership with these organizations. But to your question, we do have a dedicated team that sort of looks at it. So some of my climate and nature teams sort of support those partnerships. They're very well-run, reputable organizations with a huge amount of expertise. Actually, we learn so much from them. So actually, the relationship's quite easy. But with everything, I think good governance. So making sure you're really clear on the mandate, really clear on the outcomes, regular kind of catch-ups and board meetings. We have a summit coming up later in the year. We bring all our partners together because there's a lot of opportunity for shared learning. So it's good fun, but I think keeping yourself organized is the way to do it.
Can I get back on directly to the topic, which was my fault for meandering off, which I do. You talk about in your geographies, Canada, Ireland, and the UK,
Correct.
About helping companies get climate ready. What does that mean, and what are you doing to achieve that?
Yeah, it's interesting that's actually an internal comms thing, but obviously gets quoted, which is brilliant. So climate ready, it's a term that we've kind of chosen to adopt, but really it's all about, I would say it's in a very simplistic way, it's kind of getting the UK, Ireland or Canada ready for the transition. It means a number of different things, but at its core level, I think it's sort of encourages almost like a paradigm shift between, people think of insurance as loss management, protection, catastrophes, actually moving away from that sort of mindset to one that's a little bit more evolved. So thinking about adaptation, thinking about resilience, thinking about innovation. So climate ready comes in many different forms for us as an organization. One of the things that we are doing in our underwriting business, for example, we've sort of increased our appetite to insure commercial buildings that have got engineered timber, for example, which is sort of something new that we're looking at. And that was not just a tactical sort of move because, just to it was actually quite a strategic move for us to say, well, how we will support the built environment, where I think it's about 40% of the UK's carbon emissions are in the built environment. So that's us in our role as an underwriter supporting that transition. We're also investing in nature. As I said, that's a kind of huge part of the work we do and the projects I mentioned. They bring a lot of benefits, not just from carbon removals, but the biodiversity benefits. It improves things like flood resilience. It brings communities together. It's all about that resilience. And I think the final thing I'd probably say, and this is kind of a broader kind of conversation around the sort of institutional change that we need. So a lot of things that we can do within our power, but actually there's so many things out of our control. And what do we need to change from a systemic level? So for example, the policy and advocacy work that I mentioned, we work very closely with a lot of government bodies, policymakers, standard setters, etc., to sort of champion and encourage people to create that encouraging policy environment that we need as a financial institution to transition. So it means lots of different things, but at its core, it's about being proactive, being sort of adaptive, and being resilient.
Can I just sense check on something you said to make sure I understand it more clearly? You said your underwriting divisions have a greater appetite for ensuring timber engineered buildings.
Yes.
Is that done because it's commercially effective, or is that done because simply to drive your acknowledged green agenda? And there's always going to be a trade-off between profitability, which must be, and your intentions. I mean, it's a fascinating concept.
It is fascinating. I don't claim to be an expert on engineered timber, but I think to answer your question, I think it's both.
Yeah.
It's recognizing the opportunity, really want to be part of something we think is quite exciting, quite novel, quite innovative, but also again, it's kind of going back to that paradigm shift. It's not just about the kind of basic insurance products and managing risk. It's about creating an environment and creating and working towards a city that's a lot more sustainable, that's sustainable to floods and wildfires, and it's ultimately dependent on a lot of the building materials, for example. So it's a bit of both, the commercial opportunity, but also the part we play in the transition.
And sort of staying on that theme, I know that Aviva wants to become even more so a preferred partner for renewable energy projects and tech startups. What are you doing in that field to gain momentum?
Yeah, it's again another very exciting area. So a couple of things. We are, I think, first of all, there needs to be kind of an increase in our capacity and our appetite. So I mentioned the sort of engineered timber, but if I think out sort of renewable projects, for example, earlier this year, so I think it was in July 2025, we sort of increased our underwriting limits, looking at offshore renewable energy projects to about 150 million. And again, that was not just a kind of number, it was a bit of a signal that there is a huge amount of opportunity. Some of these projects are quite complex. I'm no engineer, but floating offshore wind, I wouldn't even know where to start. But, the direction this is where we're going. It's not just about that sort of scaling up and that it's also about the specialization. So to complement that sort of strategic move, we've brought in quite a lot of sort of sector expertise. So people who know a lot about offshore technologies, people who know about the engineering, they know about the data, they know about the nuances in technology to kind of support our risk management of that specific move. We're also investing in quite a lot of research. So we have, again, partnerships with also academic institutions. So we're doing a bit of work at the moment with the University of Exeter to look at a kind of 4-year program to research a kind of risk framework around offshore wind insurance, for example, and looking forward to the kind of the outcomes. So there's quite a lot that we're kind of doing to kind of get ourselves prepared. On the kind of our global corporate clients' perspective, they already, have tailored insurance solutions around things like wind, solar, battery storage, for example. So again, it's a move away from what we call, the traditional insurance to kind of new products.
And it's not an area that we can probably go into deeply at all, but just to confirm, and it's not just in terms of who you insure. There's all the other divisions of your company are also.
It's who we invest in as well. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask: are you investing my money, my pension money, into these projects, or is it Aviva's sovereign wealth? What?
A bit both, probably. Yeah. If you've got a particular pension pot that has got, us as a linked in as an institutional investor, yes, we would have an opportunity. And I think kind of to link to that question, to that comment, that there are lots of funds that we've created to give customers the opportunity. So customers may have an appetite to kind of look at, climate solutions, nature-based funds. We kind of, been doing a lot of work in our customer propositions team to give that subset of our kind of stakeholders the opportunity to invest in funds such as those.
Thank you. So a lot of organizations around the world, maybe some in here and watching online, are focusing on climate and nature risk. How are you developing product services to encourage and support that?
Yes. Well, I think it's no secret that I think the insurance sector is quite heavily regulated. We always have a very close relationship with the PRA, our regulators. It's quite interesting because insurance companies, banks, asset managers, there was a whole, I'd say, a big project the last couple of years. It was called the CBERS exercise. So anybody in financial services may be aware. It's all around scenario analysis. And it was really fun. At the fundamental core, it was all about regulators nervous about financial risk within the economy, making sure that big financial institutions are aware of the risks, they're assessing it in a robust way, and they've got a way to manage it. So we've been doing quite a lot of work around climate and more recently nature-related risks for a number of years. I think we're different phases depending where you are in the business, but one of the things that we're doing is trying to really embed it in our kind of business. So on the general insurance side, for example, we have models, catastrophic models that look at flood risks, that look at wildfire risk, and they build that into their pricing for their products. But there's also the opportunity side. So I mentioned some of the funds, and you asked about your pension. So yes, we do have two funds in particular that are sort of set up and managed by our in-house asset management Aviva investors. One is around the Climate Transition Fund, which is about big projects, real assets that support the climate transition in a diversified portfolio. But we also have a carbon removals fund, so things like nature-based solutions, engineered solutions, that, if you did want to invest some of your pension in particular funds, there is an opportunity to do so. So embedding it in kind of our risk management, practices and processes, but also taking advantage of the opportunities available.
And I guess looking forward, a company like Aviva has the weight and the heft, but also simply because of the business that you do, maybe particularly insurance, to really influence and drive behavioural change. So what would you say is the single biggest opportunity to do that in terms of accelerating other people, other companies towards a low carbon future?
That's an interesting question. So I think probably going back to what I said, at a minimum level, we obviously have a certain amount of assets and administration. Globally, the insurance sector has got trillions of pounds of assets that they manage. That is an enormous amount of influence. And I think there's a lot you can do to kind of transition. A big challenge with the transition, many of you in the room would know, is how we finance it. How do we get the big corporates and the big financial institutions getting their funds to the projects the way they need to on the ground? So there's a huge amount around an opportunity around allocating that capital, away from the really highly intensive industries in time and shifting it towards companies that are transitioning, companies that are focused on clean technologies. But I think from my perspective, a real game changer, and I think where the industry needs to go, and this goes to the whole point about embedding, is what do we do with our core products? And I think organizations such as ours, if we can build in those climate incentives within our core products, and it's almost BAU, I think that could be quite powerful. If I give you an example, on our motor insurance, we have a product called Aviva Zero. So if you want to buy a motor policy, you have an option we can support you with offsetting some of your emissions every time you drive your car, for example. A really sort of easy, accessible way for like a normal customer to get access to these solutions. If you are we talk about so many floods, and the previous speakers were speaking about the floods and storms in the UK. We have a scheme called Build Back Better. It's in collaboration with Flood Re. So you got a customer who's come and said, look, I've had a flood in my property. Unfortunately, we said, great, okay, we can help you. We can provide funding to help you build back your property in a way that's more resilient above the cost of just the repairs. So simple things like moving your sockets a bit further higher up the wall, installing flood doors, sump pumps I recently installed one in my home, sump pumps in your garden. There are lots of different ways that if you build it into core products is real powerful. Because I think insurance is really in a unique position because we really sit at the intersect between risk, between capital and customers. And just by virtue of our business, we have access to millions of customers. We have access to thousands of businesses, and that's a really powerful place to be.
It's a nice way to end this lightning quick discussion, because what you describe is the nirvana. It's a win-win situation. It's clearly commercially clever for your business to build back better, to use your products to reduce risk. And you know what? I want that in my house as well, don't I? And for my business. So it's the win-win situation which is going to drive behavioural change.
Absolutely.
Leah Ramoutar from Aviva. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you on stage. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.